When Expedition 33 was first revealed, it seemed like a promising first title from a studio that still had a lot to prove in the industry. However, I don't think anyone would have expected it to be one of, if not the most beloved game of 2025, and I certainly didn't expect to like it as much as I did. Every area, character, set piece, and music track was crafted with a level of depth and thoughtfulness that could have only been achieved out of a desire to make something truly beautiful. Even though it's been said time and time again, I still want to take a moment to acknowledge how impressive it is for this to be the first game of a studio comprised of less than 30 people. Even prolific studios like From Software and CD Projekt Red hit their stride after their first couple entries. However, Sandfall skips that entirely. I think calling this game my personal game of the year would honestly be doing it a disservice, seeing how it's already won that award. I don't think I've been this captivated by a game in its world since I first played Hollow Knight back in 2017, and I didn't expect any game to reach those heights again. Yet, here we are. So let me just take a moment to thank everyone who worked on Expedition 33. You have truly made something special, and any criticisms I levy against it in today's video, or any negative opinions I have on certain aspects, are far outweighed by the massive amount it just gets right. In this video, we'll be focusing on the game's narrative, recapping each important story beat before analyzing every event and what it means for our characters. We'll also touch on what makes this game's story so special, as well as some portions of it I personally felt weren't up to the standards Sandfall set for themselves. Each act will have its own part, as well as dedicated portions for the canvas's origin and the game's two endings, so feel free to skip to any specific section you want. Seeing how this video has grown to over 2 hours, and is my first foray into the world of video essays, I apologize in advance for the lack of quality in some sections, but hopefully you'll find enough enjoyment and insight to justify this video's massive length. So without further ado, let's immerse ourselves in the story of Expedition 33. The opening sequence is set in Lumiere, a fictional French city plagued by the dystopian threat of the paintress and her gommage. Once a year, the paintress rises to paint a new number on her monolith, and everyone of that age is turned to dust, and today happens to be that fateful day. We're introduced to our main protagonist, Gustave, throwing rocks at the paintress and soaking in the beauty of the Lumiere Sea. But his solitude is interrupted when his foster sister, Maëlle, appears from behind him, seemingly expecting Gustave to be there. They share a moment reminiscing about Gustave's past relationship with Sophie, his ex-girlfriend, and their breakup 4 years ago. However, today's the day Sophie gommages, seeing how she is 33 years of age, and Gustave is unsure how to approach her after so long, and him and Maëlle argue a bit about how he should introduce himself. But after some encouragement from Maëlle, Gustave finally gathers the courage to go and meet Sophie. Gustave follows Maëlle through the rooftops, where they find Sophie, laughing with two of her friends, and after a final moment of hesitation, Gustave confronts Sophie for the first time since their breakup, and the two share a heartfelt conversation. It's obvious they still care deeply for each other, as their conversation blooms into topics of morals and changing the world, before Sophie asks Gustave to walk her to the harbor where everyone is gathered, to which he happily obliges. This is where the game opens up a bit, letting you interact with the NPCs in Lumiere, who are all sympathetic towards Sophie when they see her rose necklace, which signifies that she's set to gommage today, and an overall air of melancholy looms over the gommage festival. Upon reaching the harbor, the two are approached by Gustave's apprentices, who claim that Sophie sent them there to give Gustave his expedition outfit, showing that she too still thought of him after all their time apart. The two, now realizing that their desire for closure was mutual, spend their last precious moments together on the harbor. Their somber moment is interrupted by the paintress, waking up from her slumber to paint a new number on the monolith. We see as people that age begin to fade, siblings grieve together as their parents turn to dust, lovers welcome death together, and we see Gustave holding Sophie, comforting her in her final moments as she slowly dies in his arms. We then cut to Gustav, understandably shaken by Sophie's death, being comforted by his fellow expeditioners, who are all set to leave later that night. Again, the game lets you take control and converse with everyone on the Expedition 33 team, who are all hopeful that their expedition will be the one to finally succeed where so many others have failed. When the team is done preparing, and after a quick speech from Gustav's sister Emma, Expedition 33 sets sail for the continent, officially ending the prologue of the game. The opening scene with Gustav and Maëlle sets the tone of the world perfectly in my opinion. While it may seem beautiful at first, it's obvious that the gommage has taken a toll on the citizens of Lumiere. Having a giant timer essentially counting down your inevitable death, and watching the only thing set to stop it fail consistently every year will undoubtedly make you feel less and less hopeful as the years go on. This is made clear by Maëlle, being skeptical of the expedition's usefulness, claiming that every expedition thinks they'll be the ones to finally put a stop to the Paintress, but ultimately, they always end up falling short. But Gustav is always quick to reassure her that every expedition lays the path for the next, and that eventually they'll emerge victorious. Yet still, an air of hopelessness looms over the Gommage festival. It's quite obvious that Maëlle isn't the only character having doubts about the expeditions, as we see another Lumierean, whose father was a part of Expedition 34, reject the idea of expeditions altogether, seeing how her father chose to sacrifice himself in what she saw was a hopeless cause, and that he could have spent his last precious year with her instead. This is what I love so much about the world building of the game. Instead of just using the gommage as a cool backdrop for the characters, it feels like an actual real event with tangible consequences, and makes you feel its effect on the people of Lumiere. Furniture is thrown out of the houses of people who have gommaged recently, orphanages are set up for children whose parents met their tragic demise, and citizens all over Lumiere grieve their relatives who have fallen victim to the expedition's repeated failures. It's these small details that add up and make the world feel all the more alive. The game could have easily just skipped to Sophie's death without letting you interact with anyone, but instead, it takes the time to properly flesh out its world, and that pays off spectacularly. Establishing this many things about its setting, and having the player get this invested in its characters so early on is something I honestly don't think the developers get enough praise for, and introducing so much so early could have easily backfired if it hadn't been done with this level of care and thought. However, the gommage sequence is by far the moment Expedition 33 is most known for, and rightfully so. It doesn't drag on for too long, the somber tone isn't broken by some misplaced joke or unnecessary dialogue, it lets you see firsthand the loss the people of Lumiere have to suffer through every year, and makes you feel for their cause. The death of Sophie so early on, and Gustav's subsequent devastation, is what makes the player want to see Expedition 33 succeed. And it's only when the motivations of the characters and the player align does the story of a game truly begin to shine. And this only works because the developers took the time to flesh out Sophie and Gustav's relationship in what little time we saw of them together, via short but very poignant interactions between them and other characters. One of the best examples of this is Sophie's interaction with Marie, another character who is also set to gommage that day. Marie accuses Sophie of being selfish for refusing to have children, stating that it would lead to the depopulation of Lumiere. But in response, Sophie says that she doesn't have the heart to bring others into a world so filled with loss and struggle, and that it was this point of view that caused her clash and breakup with the person she loved the most, i.e. Gustav. This not only shows us that Sophie still cares deeply for Gustav even after all those years apart, which makes her death shortly after even more tragic, but also that the reason for their separation wasn't just some petty disagreement or argument, but a fundamental difference in their worldview, in which you can't really claim either party is right or wrong. All this character work achieved in just a 30-second interaction that most players probably missed. Truly an amazing feat in writing. After the emotional roller coaster that was the prologue, we follow Expedition 33 as they make first contact with the continent. Just as they're done getting off their ship, they're confronted by an old man, who is clearly the father of Sophie, who is who we later learn is named Renoir. Everyone in the expedition team is rightfully confused about how someone could live so long without gomaging, but before any of them can get a grasp of what's going on, Renoir beheads their expedition leader. Absolute carnage then ensues as the expedition is attacked by both Renoir and a pack of Nevrons, the name they've appointed to the denizens of the continent. Gustave initially tries hiding with some members of his team, losing any semblance of coordination they had prior, only to be ambushed by a Nevron who abducts Gustave's friends before his eyes, before finally setting its sights on Gustave as the screen cuts to black. Gustave then wakes up in the spring meadows, where he gets up after struggling to regain his composure. He makes his way to a nearby cave, being greeted by the mangled corpses of previous expeditioners. He descends deeper down, finding the lifeless body of one of his teammates. He sits down next to her. Having now lost all hope in their cause, he conjures his pistol, puts it to his temple, and closes his eyes, once and for all. But before Gustave can take his life, he's confronted by Lune, one of the few people who survived Renoir's assault, who calls Gustave out for resorting to such desperate measures. They don't get to die just yet. Gustave, being comforted by the realization that he isn't the only survivor of 33, agrees to accompany Lune to their original rally point, the Indigo Tree, to regroup with any remaining members of their expedition. The first Renoir encounter and the subsequent chaos that ensued was just as much of a shock to the characters as it was to the player. There was so much hope prior to them taking off, with Gustave especially reminding everyone of the importance of the expeditions and how they'd be making a difference in the long run. So to have him shift so drastically and reach such a level of despair that it would lead him to contemplate ending it all is honestly heartbreaking. Spending your entire life preparing for such an important event and then having it go so incredibly wrong so early on will surely take a massive toll on anyone. But having Lune be the one who ultimately snaps Gustave out of his depressive state is such a great way to establish her as the calculated and logical member of the team early on. Her by-the-books approach to the expedition contrasts greatly with Gustave's ideology, which is more fueled by what he thinks is the right thing to do in a given situation, regardless of protocol or certain guidelines. We see more of this contrast when they reach their rally point, only to find nothing there but a message written on a nearby tree. The writer claims to have taken Maël to Flying Waters, and for them to meet him there. Lune is initially suspicious of the message, saying it could be a trap set up by Renoir, reasoning that if it were left by an expeditioner, it would have been signed. Gustave, on the other hand, will take any chance he can to find Maël, seeing as he failed to protect her during Renoir's ambush. After arguing for some time, Gustave gives Lune the ultimatum of either staying at the Indigo Tree or following him to find Maël, to which she agrees to the latter, and the two set up camp near Flying Waters. Back at camp, Gustave apologizes to Lune for lashing out at her earlier, and expresses his desire to keep moving. Lune, however, strongly disagrees, stating that brash decision-making could lead to them getting ambushed again. The two go back and forth, their voices cutting through the still of the night, until Gustave finally reveals that he plans on abandoning the mission, finding Maël, and taking her back to Lumiere. Breaking down even further, Gustave exclaims that he has no remaining faith in their cause anymore, and that it would be impossible for just him, Lune, and Maël to take down the Paintress alone. Lune replies by reminding Gustave of the ideology he clung to so dearly just mere days ago, that the future of Lumiere was more important than any individual life, and asks him if he still believes that. Having now realized the hypocrisy of his outburst, Gustave calms down a bit, and after some light-hearted banter, where Lune makes fun of his overly dramatic tirade, the two make their way to Flying Waters. Having Gustave's attitude towards the expeditions essentially be inverted is a great way to show just how deeply Renoir's attack and the following loss of Maël affected him. It's obvious from the beginning that Gustave was not completely on board with Maël going with them, seeing how she was considerably younger than the rest, being only 16 as opposed to 32, and we see him try to persuade her to reconsider her decision during the prologue. and now that his fears ultimately end up being true, you can sympathize with his well-intentioned, albeit slightly cowardly decision to abort the expedition and try to take Maëlle home. Lune, however, is a great example that having someone with a different worldview than you isn't always a bad thing, seeing how this is the second time she has helped Gustav cope with his trauma. Her being the one to call him out in most of their conversations could have easily come off as pretentious or girl bossy, but instead, she's written in such a way that makes her critiques and advice come from a place of genuine care for her teammates and an undying faith in their cause, instead of the typical self-righteous speeches we see all too much of in media nowadays. Together, the two form an amazing character dynamic. Like I said earlier, Gustav represents the emotional struggle and personal stakes that could arise from something as dangerous as the expeditions, while Lune balances that out by acting as the driving force and the voice of reason everyone needs to maintain their sanity and keep moving forward against immeasurable odds. Upon arriving at Flying Waters, they begin searching for any trace of Maëlle, until they encounter an ominous door, seemingly leading to nowhere. Lune is initially reluctant to enter, but before she can make up her mind, the door abruptly sucks them both in. The screen then pans out, letting us get our first glimpse of Verso, a character who's going to be exceedingly important later in the story, as he watches them from afar. We cut to Gustav and Lune, who discover that the door had teleported them to a gigantic manor, with grand staircases and winding hallways. Before long, they come across Maëlle in a room by herself, editing what appears to be an expedition journal. Gustav rushes to her as the two embrace in a heartwarming interaction, finally reuniting after so long on the continent. Overcome with guilt, Gustav gives Maëlle a tearful apology for failing to protect her during the attack, but she reassures him that what matters is that they found each other in the end. Their moment is short-lived, however, when they're confronted by the Curator, an ominous figure shrouded in chroma, the life essence of the Clair Obscur universe. Despite his threatening demeanor, Maëlle reassures them by revealing that it was the Curator who looked after her in Gustav's absence, and that he means no harm. As they're exiting the manor, they're surprised by the dramatic entrance of one of Maëlle's newly made friends, Noko. Noko is a gestural, a type of paintbrush creature in Lumiere folklore native to the continent, known for their insatiable thirst for combat. Having found a real gestural, Lune is justifiably intrigued that such creatures of legend turned out to be real, and asks Noko if other mythical creatures exist as well. However, Gustav, now motivated to continue their original mission after finding Maëlle, asks Noko for a way to cross the sea between them and the Paintress. Noko informs the expedition that the chief gestural, Golgra, might know a way to help them, and to follow him to the gestural village, fulfilling both Lune and Gustav's wishes. Our expedition regroups at camp before heading to the village, and it's obvious that their morale has been substantially lifted now that they found Maëlle, with her and Gustav throwing rocks at the monolith, a nice callback to the beginning of the prologue. They take some time to reflect on what little time they spent on the continent, and how unexpected it is for their main threat to be a fellow expeditioner, rather than the Nevrons they were prepared to find. This leads Gustav to urge Maëlle to run if she ever encounters Renoir again, and informs her that he plans to do the same, which serves to be all the more tragic knowing what's eventually going to take place. After a quick trek through the ancient sanctuary, our expedition arrives at the gestural village. Upon meeting Golgra, she instructs them to find the legendary Esquier, who possesses the ability to swim the massive distance between them and the Paintress. However, nothing involving gesturals is that simple, as Golgra only agrees to disclose Esquier's location after a trial by combat, where the expedition must face against various gestural warriors, before facing the champion of the gestural arena. After defeating all the gestural contestants, they face the previous champion, who turns out to be Ciel, the last remaining survivor of their expedition, who's ecstatic to find Gustav and his team still alive. And after a friendly duel, Ciel joins their party, as they return to Golgra, who now agrees to tell them where SKA's nest lies. Returning to camp, the team can't be more excited to meet another legendary creature, seeing how SKA was a mere myth to them just days before. Mael, though, seems to zone off, until suddenly time completely stops around her. She panics as she sees her fellow teammates frozen in place, with the exception of a masked woman who seemingly appears out of nowhere. Mael spends some time eyeing the mysterious figure, who has a suspiciously similar stature to her own. The woman reaches out at Mael, but before she can touch her, she gets interrupted by a white-haired man. Mael's curiosity is then turned to fear as she realizes who the man is, being none other than Renoir. He has a cryptic exchange with the masked woman, who we hear him call Alicia. He then directs his attention towards Mael, who is still visibly shaken after witnessing Alicia, and blames her for coming to the continent, saying that she doesn't know the fate she's condemning her expedition to. He urges her to take her friends and return to Lumiere, and that now was the last chance she'll ever get to do so, before him and Alicia disappear into nothingness. Mael snaps back to reality, with the rest of 33 resuming their conversation, before they notice Mael's state of shock. She hyperventilates as she recounts the details of her vision at the request of Lune, while Gustave and Ciel attempt to calm her down, assuring her that whatever horrors she witnessed are now over. But even after cooling down, it's obvious that her second encounter with Renoir has taken a toll on her mental state, with her now realizing that her decision to embark on the expedition may have had previously unforeseen consequences. Mael's motivation to join the expedition differs quite a lot from the other members of her team. While most are driven by a desire to end the Gommage and rid the world of the Paintress, Mael's goals are a bit less grandiose. Growing up as a foster child has undoubtedly made her less optimistic than the others, and you can feel a certain deep sadness through her interactions later in the game. This may perhaps be why she feels so connected to Gustave, given how him and his sister were the only people to take her in after being refused by so many families. This constant feeling of not fitting in very well may be the main reason she chose to embark on the expedition so early, as she might as well spend the little time she has with Gustave before he gommages, because in her eyes, there's nothing waiting for her back in Lumiere. Mael starts out Act 1 as a very reactive character, as we only see her through the eyes of Gustave during Renoir's attack. We don't get to meet her again until after the first couple hours. However, beginning from her rescue in Flying Waters, Mael has been subjected to constant nightmares and visions of mysterious figures. Right after being rescued, we see her having a nightmare about Verso, drenched in blood, another with him burning in the manor, and him standing over the corpses of dead expeditioners, all of these serving as foreshadowing for future plot threads. This all culminates in Renoir's warning, revealing that Mael has been drawn into something far larger than she could have imagined. Because of this constant foreshadowing, I've seen many people complain that Mael being the quote-unquote chosen one of the story was a bit too on the nose. However, I don't think that's the case. With the exception of Alicia's poem, Mael's nightmares are quite brief and ambiguous, and can easily be brushed off as her still having lingering trauma from facing Renoir. Verso's appearances as well are spaced apart in such a way that the player probably won't remember him by the time he's introduced, as to not spoil his character. Another reason why Mael's story's significance might not be obvious early on is the game's focus on the entire cast. All members of the expedition get their own scenes and time on screen, which ensures that Mael's visions don't stand out as obvious narrative signposts, but instead blend naturally into the broader story of the game, where every expeditioner seems equally important, until much, much later. Speaking of Alicia's poem, what a hauntingly beautiful scene, which is enhanced even further upon beating the game and realizing its true meaning. I'm a huge fan of cryptic sequences that make sense later, and this is the moment that solidified this game's amazing writing for me. The voice acting as well is a standout during her brief appearances, and why I consider them some of the best moments the game has to offer. Although many people rightfully praise Jennifer English's performance as Mael, I think Alicia showcases her best voice work yet. Having calmed Mael down, the team find SK in his nest, who turns out to be much bigger than any of them expected. He tasks the expedition with finding his rocks, which enable him to perform various feats, including crossing the vast sea to the Paintress. Flory, the rock he requires, is found at the Stonewave Cliffs, a nearby location that SK agrees to accompany them to, now joining the expedition's party. Upon arriving there, the team is greeted by a massive Neveron, which is swiftly taken out by SK in a single swoop, showing that despite his harmless demeanor, he's one of the most powerful beings in the continent. They begin their search for Flory, which eventually leads them to the terrifying Lampmaster, who serves as the final obstacle between them and their means of crossing the sea, and after a grueling battle, the Lampmaster is defeated, finally reuniting SK with his precious rock. Before crossing the sea, however, Gustav and Maëlle take a final moment to throw rocks at the monolith, which has become somewhat of a ritual between the two. They're in awe of how close they are to the Paintress now, surely feeling sentimental after having reached so far in their journey. But before Gustav can land his mighty throw, he's struck by Renoir, who ambushed them from behind. Gustav begs Maëlle to run, reminding her of their promise. However, Renoir traps her in an ethereal cage, preventing her escape. Gustav asks Renoir what could have possibly motivated him to turn on his own people, to betray his own cause, but Renoir remains silent. In his righteous fury, Gustav lands a solid hit on Renoir, impaling him on some nearby spikes, the force so great that it causes Gustav's prosthetic arm to break. Yet impossibly, Renoir rises again, his wounds already healed. He retrieves his cane and continues his march towards Gustav. Maëlle pleads to Gustav to not save her, to preserve his own life, to continue on without her. However, she only gets a sorrowful glance in reply, his decision already made. Preparing for one last attack, he lunges towards Renoir, who easily dodges his hit and stabs him in the chest. Maëlle lets out a final cry, her cage now being broken. She clutches Gustav's corpse, refusing to believe that the one person who truly cared for her is now gone. Surprisingly, she's comforted by Renoir, who says that she won't realize it now, but what he did was an act of kindness. He apologizes for her being caught in a greater conflict, but reminds her of his warning and that something like this was bound to happen. Renoir then raises his cane, seemingly attempting to give Maëlle the same fate as Gustav, before being stopped by Verso. Renoir is disappointed at Verso's arrival, telling him that he doesn't get to interfere now after being absent for so long. It's obvious they know each other, as the two speak of events and conflicts we still don't know of yet, with Alicia watching them both from above. Verso checks on Maëlle and tells her to join her friends on SK and that he'll handle things with Renoir. Reluctantly, she descends, leaving Renoir and Verso alone. Maëlle mourns Gustav at camp, absolutely devastated that the expedition has taken such a tragic turn. How could Gustav betray his promise? Or was it merely just a bluff to keep her safe? A white lie he didn't think he'd have to act on so soon. But before Maëlle can answer these questions, she's comforted by SK. He silently offers her a hug, ditching his usual cheerful quips given the gravity of the situation, and Maëlle falls asleep in his embrace. Later that night, Lune and Ciel share a sorrowful conversation, seeing how they failed to help Gustav due to being on SK, and they fall asleep in their despair. They're woken up, however, by Verso, returning Gustav's prosthetic arm. The two are startled by his sudden appearance, and ask him why he wears an expedition outfit. Verso then reveals that him and Renoir were both part of Expedition Zero, the first ever expedition to leave Lumiere, and that after reaching the continent they seemingly stopped aging and became immune to the gommage. He also informs them that Renoir's motivation for ending all expeditions is to preserve his own immortality, as he fears that the death of the Paintress would spell the end of his prolonged existence. Maëlle hears this, her will to end the Paintress now reignited with the promise of avenging Gustav, and agrees to let Verso join the expedition. Gustav's death was as tragic as it was expected. His character arc had already been completed by the time he made it to the Stonewave Cliffs, with him going from hopeful about the expeditions to depressively nihilistic to hopeful again after finding Maëlle, mainly serving as her mentor. And as we know, mentor-type characters usually don't have the best reputation when it comes to living very long, but his death being expected doesn't make it any less devastating. The whole sequence is laden with sorrow, From the harsh environment and heavy rain of the Stonewave Cliffs, to Mael's constant pleading throughout the entire ordeal, to Gustav's undying determination till the end, everything serves to make the player feel the weight of Gustav's tragic demise. However, what I think brings the entire scene together is Renoir. This is the first time we've seen him interact with the expedition since his attack on the beach, but that doesn't make his screen presence any less powerful. He grabs your attention for the entire scene and doesn't let go. This is the culmination of all of Mael's visions, the outcome of her not heeding Renoir's warnings, and now she's going to pay the price. He doesn't seem very enthusiastic about it though. The pained look on his face, the constant tapping of his cane, the deliberate and methodical way he talks. You can tell he isn't doing this just for evil's sake. It doesn't bring him joy to kill innocents. He just wants what's best for all sides, and is willing to go as far as he needs to in order to achieve his goal, and even someone as inherently righteous and noble as Gustav will have to die if he stands in Renoir's way. Spending an entire act building up a character, seeing their struggles, dreams, and ambitions, establishing their personality, and most importantly, having the player get so attached to them is a massive feat on its own. But killing off said character after having the player get so invested in them is a move I don't think many developers would have the confidence to do. Many games can't even establish that sort of connection throughout their entire runtime. So for Expedition 33 to kill off its main character entirely, instead of clinging on to him for the entire story, just shows how much confidence they had in their writing. They know that you experienced all the thrills and heights of Act 1 through Gustav's eyes, and that you'll undoubtedly be feeling empty after his death. But they know that they can not only reach those same heights again, but surpass them, regardless if Gustav is present or not. This feeling of emptiness mirrors perfectly what the other members of 33 are going through. They react to his demise in such believable ways that you'd probably relate to at least one of their coping mechanisms on a personal level. Mael, for instance, is overcome with grief and spends the night crying, which falls in line with her character. She's more prone to dealing with her emotions in the form of outbursts or breakdowns given her young age. Lune, on the other hand, channels her grief differently, as we see Gustav's death stress her out even further about the expedition's success, as she's terrified that his sacrifice might go in vain if they're unable to succeed. Even Ciel, usually the calmest and most collected member of the group, struggles to hold herself together, her composure faltering under the weight of Gustav's loss. However, the most bold story decision by far is the instant replacement of Gustav with Verso. From the few glimpses we get of him before Act 2, we can't really decipher his motivations. We know he's against Renoir, and we know he wants to end the Paintress, but other than that, we know surprisingly little about him. The developers could have easily used him as just an exposition dump character, someone who's far more experienced than our team and therefore is willing to share his vast knowledge with them. Yet Verso seems to be the complete opposite. He purposefully withholds information until either being pressured into spilling the truth or lying his way out of it. Even from his first campfire scene, he doesn't reveal his name, expedition, motivation, or alliance until being explicitly asked by one of 33, and you get the feeling he'd be perfectly content with joining them without disclosing such information. Yet, there's something oddly likable about such an untrustworthy character. It's expected that the expedition team would be clamoring to fill the Gustav-shaped hole in their hearts, and Verso realizes that quite well, and despite being basically a polar opposite to Gustav, he leans into that entirely. While he still remains mostly mysterious during Act 2, he does have some genuinely charming character moments and interactions that give off that same warm feeling of camaraderie Gustav did. While some see this as manipulation, I see it as Verso warming up to our team and learning to love them as people instead of just tools to achieve his goals. Whether him growing so close to them was a rare display of emotion from Verso or a deceitful attempt at furthering his agenda is ultimately up to the player to decide. After the team has gotten over the initial shock of losing Gustav, Verso leads them through the forgotten battlefield, getting them closer to the monolith. He warns them of a dangerous Nevron who roams the area, the one responsible for all the expeditioner corpses strewn everywhere. The abundance of death is starting to visibly affect Maëlle though, as we see her walking shakily through the bloodbath that surrounds them, clutching Gustav's prosthetic for comfort. Verso notices this, and suggests they take a detour to a nearby glade to bury Gustav, a place where he used to bury his own expeditioner friends. They continue their journey, the density of corpses increasing the deeper they go into the battlefield, until reaching the bridge separating them from the burial site. After one last stretch of bodies, the grotesque scenery seems to push Maëlle over the edge. As she completely breaks down, she laments about how everywhere they go, death seems to closely follow, and that she isn't capable of dealing with that anymore. She takes it out on Verso and Ciel, blaming them for their lack of sympathy towards Gustav's death. How could they continue on with their mission so nonchalantly after witnessing something so utterly devastating? Ciel attempts to calm Maëlle down, reminding her of the oath they swore, to continue on no matter who they lose, but they're interrupted by the duelist, finally sensing the perfect moment to strike. The bridge collapses, plunging Maëlle ankle deep into a pool of blood, where dead expeditioners have been piled up like dead livestock. They are not the first victims of the duelist. Verso readies the team for battle, snapping them out of their dazed state, and they begin fighting the duelist. The team display excellent teamwork, with Maëlle and Verso especially displaying total synergy, and together they overcome the legendary Nevron. After the battle, Lune replies to Maëlle's initial question before the fight. She points to the carnage around them. This is what they're fighting to stop, not to preserve themselves or their loved ones, but to prevent anyone else from witnessing the horrors of the continent and the Gomage. The team make their way to the glade, their bond now stronger than ever given their recent victory, and they spend a moment saying goodbye to Gustav. It's an emotional scene, as you can see the graves of Verso's comrades, some even being from Expedition Zero. Maëlle tears up as she thanks Gustav one last time for being with her as a brother, a father, and most importantly, as her only family, as she lays his arm on a bed of flowers. And after one final goodbye, the team returns to camp, finally coming to terms with the fact that their team will unfortunately always be just one expeditioner short. There's one interaction during the beginning of Act 2 that I think encapsulates Maëlle's grief perfectly. Right before heading to the battlefield, we see her throwing rocks into the distance, still holding on to Gustav's habit, but instead of it being a warm moment between the two, it's a sharp reminder of Gustav's absence. There's no one left who'd understand their little ritual. Verso sees this and tries comforting her, telling her that losing family is a difficult thing, and that he can relate to such a feeling of loss. He tries to continue before Maëlle interrupts him. She says she knows what he's going to say, and that she doesn't need any more surface-level condolences, and asks Verso to leave, to which he slightly nods his head and leaves behind Gustav's journal, which he recovered from the Stonewave Cliffs, seemingly knowing its importance to Maëlle. What a beautiful way to tackle something so personal, and what a strikingly realistic representation of grief as well. Such personal character moments could have easily been lost in the spectacle and grandeur of the greater plot, but surprisingly, Act 2 takes the time to focus on every character despite its significantly larger scope. It's true that condolences and sympathies can often feel hollow, sometimes even irritating when losing someone so close to you. But maturing is realizing that these gestures aren't just tradition or obligation, but genuine care for you and the people you lost, and there's ultimately not much else people can offer. Verso realizes this too, and we see Maëlle confronting him after their fight with the duelist. She thanks him for finding them such a beautiful place to bury Gustav. He replies by telling her that she was right about what she said about condolences, and that they hold little comfort when offered so close to such a tragic event. But people often don't know what else to say. She acknowledges this, respecting Verso's sincerity, and ironically, their conversation about words of comfort not being meaningful brought her more comfort than any traditional condolences ever could. Another thing to note about Act 2 is Maëlle's motivation change, and how closely it resembles Gustav's during early Act 1. Mael's objective effectively switches from defeating the Paintress to avenging Gustav by killing Renoir, with the former simply being a means to achieve the latter rather than her main objective. This draws a parallel to Gustav's complete focus on finding Mael during the first act, with their quest to end the Gommage seemingly taking a back seat until they each achieve their own personal goals. The team gather at the campfire, with Verso helping them plan out their next step. He informs them of the Paintress' heart, a being tied to the Paintress who needs to be defeated before heading to the monolith. But first, they need to take a detour to Minoko's station to recruit Verso's oldest friend, Minoko, who happens to be Noko's father as well. And after a hilarious encounter where we discover that Minoko possesses the peculiar ability to transform into Nevrons by gathering their feet, Minoko and Noko join our expedition. Minoko offers some much needed comedic relief after a quite depressing Act 2 so far. Him and Verso have such an amazing dynamic together, as the two contrast each other quite well, with Minoko bringing out Verso's lighter side instead of his usual brooding demeanor. Their constant bickering and teasing makes their multiple decade-long friendship all the more believable. Minoko's motivation to join the expedition as well falls in line with his more easygoing personality, as when Minoko first hears about them going to Old Lumiere, he utterly refuses to join them. But beneath his well-articulated English-speaking gentleman persona, he's still a Gestural, and upon hearing the prospect of them fighting many Nevrons along the way, he agrees immediately, seemingly disregarding any concerns he had prior in favor of jolly combat. His constant quips and jokes aren't overdone though, and emotional scenes still hold their weight and aren't undermined by unneeded comedy. I'd even argue that Minoko staying silent during the more somber moments enhances them even further, as now, even the usually funny character has been forced to take things seriously. The developers didn't use him to the point where he might come off as annoying or repetitive, but instead, as a touch of levity when the going gets a bit too tough for our team to handle alone. The Paintress' heart is located in Old Lumiere, the larger landmass our Lumiere was a part of before an event called the Fracture split them apart, and the team is amazed at its existence. Collapsed buildings and massive golden swords litter the landscape of Old Lumiere, and it's obvious that it hasn't seen the best of days. Our team find themselves being separated after a failed attempt by Minoko at clearing the path, with the team consisting of Minoko, Lune, and Ciel, and another with Verso, Mael, and Noko. Lune's team wander a bit before encountering Expedition 58's journal, the ones Verso was traveling with before them and the last expedition to make it to Old Lumiere. Lune is visibly shocked upon reading the journal and is afraid about Mael's safety. Minoko assures her that Verso would never harm Mael and whatever she saw must have been a misunderstanding, but before we can know what she witnessed, we cut to Verso and Mael. They make their way to the center of the city, where Lune's team is, but on the way, Verso seemingly disappears, leaving Mael and Noko alone. While initially startled, Noko assures Mael that Verso will probably be close by, and that his disappearances are a common occurrence, but Mael is still skeptical. She explores the area, eventually finding a huge manor, with architecture similar to the one she was rescued from by Gustav in Flying Waters. She approaches the door as it opens, revealing a fading woman with similar appearance to that of the curator. Verso then re-emerges and attempts to ambush the woman, but before he can strike, Renoir intervenes. He mocks Verso's attempt at disrupting their family, and we see Alicia and the woman close the manor door behind them, leaving Verso and Renoir to settle things like men. They go back and forth, with Mael interrupting them, enraged at seeing the man who killed Gustav still alive and well. Her vengeful glare only earns a pitiful glance from Renoir, who reveals that Verso had been his son all along, shattering Mael's understanding of him and the true motivation behind his actions. Before she can say anything though, Lune and Ciel catch up, already having found out Verso's secret from reading the journal. Lune is justifiably furious at Verso for withholding such a crucial detail, but he brushes off her anger, urging them to focus on fighting Renoir, promising them closure after the battle. Throughout their fight, Renoir grows more and more discontent with Verso's actions, blaming him for their family's broken state and expressing his extreme disappointment in Verso's decisions. This culminates in Renoir readying one final attack, aiming it at the entire expedition. They jump out of the way, with all of them avoiding the attack, except for Noko, whom the attack hit directly, and we see Minoko holding the lifeless body of his beloved son. In a fit of rage, Maëlle attempts to avenge Noko right then and there, attacking Renoir multiple times, but he nullifies all of her strikes before disappearing, seemingly taking the entire manor with him. This utterly infuriates Verso, who curses loudly, realizing he has now lost his one chance at ambushing the fading woman, his true motivation for doing so still mostly unknown. There's an awkward silence back at camp, with 33 now reconsidering their decision to let Verso into the team so early. Lune starts by berating Verso, telling him that him not informing them of his relationship with Renoir is lying by omission, while Verso stays defensive, stating that it's none of their business, and that his loyalty still lies with their expedition, and that Renoir being his father ultimately changes nothing about his motivations. Ciel attempts to act as a mediator between the two, trying to diffuse their heated argument, while Maëlle offers nothing to the conversation, only being able to utter the words, "Family is complicated," seemingly relating to Verso's familial struggles, but still not being entirely comfortable with his dishonesty. The conversation takes a much sadder turn though, as Minoko joins the team at the campfire, clutching a jar containing Noko's body. Gestrels possess the ability to reincarnate at the sacred river, and Lune asks Minoko why he doesn't just bring Noko back. However, he informs her that every time a Gestrel is brought back to life, a portion of their memories are lost, and even if they brought Noko back, it won't be the same Noko who died, posing an intriguing question of what makes us who we are, our memories or our physical selves, or perhaps even a combination of both. Before we continue with our story recap, let's take a moment to analyze Act 2 so far, and why I think it's the strongest act out of the three. You may have noticed that I haven't really covered any character moments apart from Verso and Maëlle. Thankfully, that's not because the others were neglected, quite the opposite actually. After every mission, you're given the chance to converse with all the members of 33, in addition to SK and Minoko, all through the eyes of Verso. A similar system was also present in Act 1, with optional sequences after every mission, where we saw Gustav and his team converse and discuss their plans, while also offering some more personal moments between the members of 33. However, Act 2 expands on this even further, and offers optional sequences for every member of our team, in addition to the regular expedition-wide sequences that were also in Act 1. It's in these sequences where the bulk of the character work is being done, while also fleshing out some of the finer details of how life was like before our characters embarked on their expedition. This system is a bit controversial though, with some people praising it for the sheer amount of interactions the developers put into the game, with over 2 hours of cutscenes, while others don't like the simplistic nature of these scenes, with the vast majority of them just being Verso and another character standing idly while talking about a particular subject. I tend to lean more towards the first side, but I can still understand some of the complaints about this system. While on one hand, I absolutely adore some of these conversations, with them being genuinely funny and well written, while on the other, I do feel like some story beats should have been given more importance, instead of being locked behind optional campfire scenes with a relatively lower quality than the other cutscenes present in the game. What this system definitely doesn't do, however, is detract from the experience in any way, as you can simply choose to not engage with it if you dislike its slower pacing and quieter tone. But you'd be missing out on some gameplay and cosmetic elements, as well as some of the most important and best written character moments in the entire game. Let's take a look at Lune's scenes for example. She begins her interactions with Verso being extremely curious about his origin, bombarding him with constant questions about the nature of his immortality and the time he spent on the continent. Verso, usually being quite flattered at Lune's interest in him, gives her just enough information for her to leave him alone, but not enough that it would satiate her constant thirst for knowledge. We learn from their scenes that Verso actually returned to Lumiere after Expedition 0, but because of people's distrust in him, even after his attempt at helping the numerous expeditions after his own, life was just never the same for him after his return. This all culminated in him being betrayed and attacked during one of these expeditions, which led him to stop returning to Lumiere and living in the continent permanently. It isn't all about Verso though, as we learn more about Lune's motivations to assume such an important role in the expedition. Her parents were researchers, and they had Lune be their assistant as early as the age of 4, so she could start preparing for her eventual expedition as early as she could. They rooted this desire so deeply in her and had so much confidence in her that even in their dying words, in the log for Expedition 46, Lune's mother says she's at peace with her death, as she's certain that her daughter will finish what she started. Lune had no say in this though, as her role and profession were picked out by her parents at such a young age. While she states that eventually her and her parents' goals aligned, with Lune having a genuine attachment to her expedition and doing everything in her power to see it succeed. But she also wishes she would have been given more time to explore her hobbies, as we see she has a passion for music and songwriting that has unfortunately been suppressed due to her parents not thinking very highly of such passions, seeing them as selfish and pointless. While I won't cover every character's interaction in this segment, as that's a bit beyond the scope of this video, I hope you get the general idea of how the relationship system is structured. These scenes are just one of the many examples of the incredibly efficient writing in Act 2 and the overall game as a whole. They don't drag on for too long. No interaction feels pointless or just there for the sake of padding. Every one of them serves a purpose, either being essential world building or deepening a bond between two members. We learn more about Ciel and her life before the expedition, and the grief she feels over the premature loss of her husband Pierre. We see Verso deepen his bond with Maëlle, forming a sort of brother-sister dynamic, and we even see Verso and Minoko reminisce about their many adventures together, and bond over their shared love for hunting Nevrons. These interactions are also why I think the campfire, while probably being one of the most unassuming set pieces in the game at first glance, is such a compelling area. Think about your favorite scenes so far. Maybe it's Gustav's breakdown after losing Maëlle. Maybe it's one of Ciel and Lune's heart-to-hearts. It could be Verso playing the piano and reminiscing about his life in Lumiere. What do all these scenes have in common? You guessed it, they all take place at camp in between our main story missions. They filled it out with so many characters to talk to and so many cutscenes to enjoy that I never felt annoyed at being brought back to camp after every mission, but instead, it acted as a well-deserved break and a place to wind down after the non-stop action of the main storyline. If I'm being honest, the camp in Expedition 33 is probably my favorite safe house type area in any game I've played. As much as I love Firelink Shrine from Dark Souls 1 or Safe House E9 from Black Ops Cold War, the amount of story content in E33's camp is unlike any game I've played, and even if it comes with some drawbacks, I absolutely applaud the dev team for committing to the idea this much. Speaking of camp, Verso and the team think of a way to destroy the barrier between them and the Paintress, given that their plan to destroy the Paintress' heart failed spectacularly due to Renoir's interference. They consult the Curator, who informs them that the chroma contained in the Axons, incredibly powerful beings residing in the various islands surrounding the monolith, is powerful enough to create a weapon that would be able to destroy the barrier and allow them to confront the Paintress directly. Verso was initially dismissive of the idea, as even with his immortality he was completely unable to take out even a single Axon, and he doesn't want to risk losing the expedition he grew so close to. Lune, however, expressing complete determination to find a way to reach the Paintress, says that even if the chances of them surviving are slim, they should still take the risk, as them surviving was never the goal. She turns out to be right, as the team slay both Axons Sirene and Visage, after long and arduous battles with each of them. There's not much to say about the Axon fights story-wise. They're just all-around amazing spectacle fights with beautiful arenas and soundtracks to go along with them. It is worth it to mention though that Visage in particular bears an eerie resemblance to Verso, with both of them wielding a dagger and a longsword, with even Verso commenting on their similarity after the fight, the relevance of which we'll find out soon enough. The team end up reflecting on their journey after having slain such powerful beings, with Mael ultimately being the one chosen to wield the fateful barrier breaker, given the curator's strange affinity towards her. Before they embark on their journey to the monolith though, Ciel reveals that Verso had been hiding his secret wine stash in none other than Esquier, and the team indulged in one last drunken celebration before facing the Paintress. One member, however, is oddly quiet during what seemed to be a heartwarming end to their journey, as Verso removes himself from the party to spend some time alone on a cliff near camp, with direct view of the monolith that tormented him for so long. Alicia comes along, staring lovingly at her estranged brother as she stands by his side, the two sharing a moment in silence, turning to face the source of their family's broken state. She hands him a letter titled A Life to Dream in French, and Verso is relieved by his sister's attempt to reach out to him once more. He puts aside the letter and slowly reaches out to remove Alicia's mask, saying that his beloved sister needs not hide her face under such a veil, allowing us to see Alicia's true features, revealing a teenager no older than 16, with burn scars and marks blemishing what was once a beautiful and innocent smile, now turned into an apathetic, sorrowful gaze. She's undoubtedly been part of a horrific accident, as one of her eyes has been burned clean from its socket, leaving a hollow void where it once was. But despite her afflictions, Verso still sees his precious sister, and they embrace at last, both of them knowing this will most likely be the last time they get to do so. A familiar face appears behind them, and with one tap of his cane, Renoir makes his presence known, seemingly just wanting one last chance to reason with his son before he attempts to slay the source of Lumiere's suffering. Renoir asks Verso if he truly knows the price he'll be paying by killing the Paintress, seemingly hinting at more than just them losing their immortality, bringing into question the true stakes of their endeavor. Even if Verso is willing to take such a risk, there's no guarantee that his team will also be on his side when it's all said and done, being unclear whether he's referring to the risk of facing the Paintress or the consequences that follow their long sought-after victory. The final camp scene before the monolith was one of the most confusing, yet incredibly riveting sequences in the game for me. So many little details that work to enhance the upcoming battle and the subsequent revelations after our expedition's victory. Take for example Renoir's final plea to Verso, which brings into question Renoir's motivation of just preserving his immortality, which on looking back has seemingly never been confirmed by Renoir himself, only his notoriously disingenuous son. This scene brings into question our entire expedition, as he seems to be implying that the Paintress is in fact the source of life for the continent, not the one erasing it, and that removing her would cause much more than just killing Renoir and his family. This makes us reconsider their upcoming actions even more, as instead of the Paintress just being a straightforward malicious presence, she seems much more sympathetic than we might have thought, challenging our expedition's decision to end her life. These unplanned consequences are reinforced even further by Verso's sudden silence after they acquire the barrier breaker. If anything, he should be elated that he's so close to reaching his goal after an entire century of failed expeditions, but he seems to be extremely weary instead. When they sit down at the campfire to reminisce about their journey, and when Ciel says Verso had been hiding something from them, you can see the panic in Verso's eyes, and the following relief when the aforementioned secret is revealed to be his wine stash, and he immediately goes to be by himself afterward. He's very obviously still concealing something from them, and the realization that he's dragged them along this far without telling them has begun to take a toll on him. Upon breaking the barrier, the team arrive at the foot of the monolith, confronting the sleeping Paintress residing at its base. They begin attacking, with the Paintress completely ignoring their presence, being unaffected by their strikes. Confused, they stop fighting and take a moment to reconsider their strategy. Mael begins to approach the sleeping figure, now doubtful that she's really the Paintress they've been looking for. But before she can say anything else, the fading woman appears, revealing herself to be the true Paintress, with the sleeping giant simply being a vessel for her to control. She sets the team on fire, with ethereal flames bursting from their skulls, seemingly mimicking the same torment Alicia had to endure. The agony stops, however, with the team's skin still intact, only the lingering pain of the embers remaining. Verso instructs the team to follow the Paintress, which takes them to the interior of the monolith, which contains tainted versions of the many landscapes our expedition witnessed along their journey. While traversing the harsh environment, our team is periodically interrupted by various visions, seemingly being memories from the Paintress herself. We see a woman standing over a canvas, before suddenly bursting into flame, another with the same woman teaching her 3 children to paint, 2 girls and a boy. Along the way, we find a door to the manor, containing an expedition journal. This time, however, it's not from any expedition team, rather a woman named Aline, grieving after the loss of her son.
What hurts more are the memories unmade. The conversations we'll never have. The time we'll never spend. I want rage to consume me. Anything to fill the hollow. But rage won't come. And I just float in an endless nothingness.
At the Tainted Cliffs, we see her sitting alone, with her husband attempting to comfort her, but she refuses his solace and walks away, leaving him to sit alone. We see her fighting with what appears to be Alicia before walking away in anger, with Alicia signaling for her to return. We are then greeted by a fading boy, the same one from the Paintress's memories, who offers to take our team to Lumiere. Tainted Lumiere is where we see our final vision, the woman and her son, sitting together and playing the piano, Verso's favorite instrument. Despite not being able to decipher their importance, our expedition takes note of these visions, coming to the same conclusion we did, that a horrible accident happened to this family, an accident that caused their mother to grow distant and cold, leaving them to deal with their grief alone. Regardless, our team continues onward, finally reaching the entrance to the monolith's main spire. Waiting for them is none other than Renoir. Now realizing that his son had ignored his pleas, he begs Verso to return in what is probably the most gut-wrenching scene so far, with Renoir growing more and more desperate for Verso to return. But alas, Verso remains stoic, stating that his father lost him a long time ago, and that his decision to confront the Paintress is final. Renoir begins fighting our expedition, being aided by a beast made of pure chroma, putting all the power he can into stopping Verso. But just when our team thinks they've defeated him, with him lying helplessly as Maëlle readies her sword, he emerges with one last burst of energy, raining down chroma on the entire team. But they're saved by the Curator, who Renoir seems to have been expecting. He begs him to prevent 33 from killing the Paintress, but once again his words fall on deaf ears. In response, the Curator holds Maëlle's hand, placing it on Renoir's chest, as he proceeds to gommage him.
I love them too.
And with that comes the end of perhaps one of the most sympathetic antagonists in gaming history. While Maëlle feels relief after having finally fulfilled her promise to end Gustave's killer, you can't help but feel sorry for Renoir, as till the end he expressed an undying love for Verso and the rest of his family. Verso, even though it's an outcome he desired, is at a loss for words after witnessing his father's death, only being able to continue onward with his mission. The monolith may just be my single favorite area in the entire game story-wise. It's the culmination of everything we've been through so far, both narratively as we discover the true nature of the Paintress, and literally as we trek through twisted versions of the same areas we've grew so attached to. This is also where the show-don't-tell nature of this game's storytelling takes center stage, as almost all of Aline's story is delivered to us via black and white recreations of her memories, allowing us to see firsthand the events that led her to isolating herself from her family. Where these sequences truly shine though is on repeat playthroughs, where you know the full context behind Aline's actions, allowing you to truly appreciate the tragic foreshadowing these scenes provide. However, the star of the show once again is none other than Renoir. His second encounter is highly regarded as one of the best boss fights in the entire game, and rightfully so. The set piece, the music, the pained exchanges between him and Verso, without even getting into the gameplay, this scene is already one of the strongest in the game. The most tragic death so far has been Gustav, surely leading players to hate the person responsible for his tragic demise. But Renoir's death scene is so tragic and melancholic that you can't help but feel sorry for him despite what he did. All he wanted was for his son to return, for him and Alicia to settle their differences and live as a family once more. And as much as you can hate the actions he took to reach such a goal, you can surely sympathize with his motivations. The team arrive at the Monolith Peak, their long journey finally nearing its end. They confront the Paintress, lost in her delusion, staring at a tattered Lumiere in the distance, unaware of the suffering she's inflicted upon its people. Verso is the first to reach out to her, and she responds excitedly, calling him and Maëlle her children and begging them to go home with her. Surely the ramblings of a grief-stricken mother, latching onto anyone resembling her beloved progeny. Upon being reminded of the state of her family, her tone sours as she focuses all the chroma she can conjure around our team. However, they remain resilient, their senses hardened after countless battles fought, and they ready themselves to face one last threat, the future of Lumiere lying solely in their hands. Halfway through their fight, the sleeping being at the foot of the monolith rises to help aid its master, which prompts Verso to call in SK to fly them up to the Paintress and her construct. They continue fighting, with her bending the very fabric of reality around them, but they continue onward until she can no longer sustain her form. She stumbles into Verso's arms, asking why he would possibly do such a thing to his beloved mother. He assures her that she'll be okay, and that things are better this way, as he grabs Maëlle's hand, places it on the Paintress, and gommages her, same as she did for Renoir. The expedition are in disbelief, their mission finally fulfilled, the number on the monolith now erased. They did it, the reign of the Paintress is now over. Gustav's sacrifice did not go in vain. Lune and Ciel are ecstatic, their life's purpose now fulfilled, and they place down one final symbolic flag in honor of Expedition 33, the expedition that finally put a stop to the gommage and freed Lumiere of its yearly horror. Yet something feels wrong. Verso and Minoko are oddly quiet, seemingly dreading this moment rather than savoring it. Unexpected given their loyalty to the expedition. Regardless, Maëlle asks SK to take them back to Lumiere, to bring the good news to its citizens and indulge in the upcoming celebrations. Fireworks go off as our team arrive at the harbor, with their loved ones greeting them fervently. Everyone is here, the Lumiere common folk, the members of Expedition 32, even Gustav's sister and apprentices are here to greet 33. Children rush to meet SK and Minoko, excited to see the creatures they've only heard about in rumors and silly stories. Lune's colleagues are elated at her safe arrival, bombarding her with questions about her mission, questions that she'd be happy to answer. We see Maëlle make her way to Emma, still seemingly waiting for her brother to show up, but sadly, he never does, and you can see that realization wipe the smile from her face, souring an otherwise heartwarming moment. Maëlle shakes her head, confirming Emma's fears, and we see Gustav's apprentices slowly come to the same conclusion as well. Maëlle tries comforting them, and she kneels down to give one of them Gustav's journal, a journal he wished they would read one day. But it's only upon reading the name written on it does the boy realize the fact that his mentor isn't coming back, and he runs away in disbelief, reopening the gaping wound Gustav's loss left in Maëlle. Verso sits alone at the harbor, his absence going unnoticed. He reaches down, revealing Alicia's letter, still intact even after all they've been through. He looks behind him, and after making sure that he's alone, he takes a deep breath and begins reading.
Brother, I tire of the conflicts and deceptions that plague our family and theirs. So, I entrust you with this letter. Whether you give it to her is up to you. I'm at peace with what's to come. When the time comes, I hope you will be too. Maya, it's a strange feeling watching you with my brother, laughing and smiling, without the scars or the memories that afflict me. Alicia, as she was meant to be, not this painted version that I am. My family, a facsimile of yours, and this world, a mirror, painted by your mother, the paintress, to stave off her grief. Seeing your expedition through would plunge us all into the abyss. For in ridding the world of the paintress, you'd lose the sole force standing against the one who would erase us, the one who invokes the flowers of the gommage. An act of love, for he does love her. Your father. On her monolith, she paints a warning for us all, of the few she can save as her power wanes. We all wish for our families to thrive. Your family, however, believes only one can survive. But perhaps you'll find another way. You who have lived amongst us, perhaps you differ from your father and your sister, as I differ from mine. Your mother paints life, whilst your father, death. What will you paint?
We watch as people begin to fade once again, this time unbound by age. Emma is the first to suffer its consequence. Crowdfolk are too confused by what's happening to react, unable to process the tragedy unfolding before them. Gustav's apprentices grieve as they accept their fate. His legacy crumbles with no one left to carry the torch. Yet still the gommage spares nobody. Maëlle looks onward, seeing Ciel, her sister in battle, close her eyes as she disappears into nothingness. She reaches out for her, awaiting a miracle, but there's nothing to reach out for. She looks for Lune. Perhaps she will know. Perhaps she will have the answer to this question, as she's answered so many before, but she's just as confused as Maëlle is, her face contorting in rage as she meets her end, having lost despite doing everything right. Maëlle's composure falters as she begins to meet the same fate herself. She's lost everything and everyone she once held dear. The all too familiar shadow of loss looms over her. She was right. Death does follow her everywhere she goes, and this time, instead of resisting, she accepts it as a life where she's left to roam a hollow world, devoid of her new family, is much worse than no life at all.
You're okay.
Alicia is woken up by another nightmare of Verso. Even though he's been dead for quite some time, the sight of him engulfed in flame is not one she can easily forget.
Alicia?
Clair is calling, her cold voice echoing through the halls of the manor. She's been distant ever since Verso died, so devoted to fighting the writers who murdered him that she's forgotten the rest of the family she has left. Alicia regains her composure, a pained sigh leaving her as she makes her way to Renoir's atelier. It was once his favorite room, filled with vibrant colors and painted worlds, now in disarray, with bedsheets covering paintings that will never be finished. Only one canvas remains now, one last remnant of the accident that destroyed the Desandres, and it's where Renoir and Aline have been for the past 51 monolith years. Clair emerges from behind Verso's canvas, having recently left it herself, the paint streaks on her eyes fading slowly. She's helped her father long enough now, and it's time she attend to the matters of the real world, away from his rescue mission. He spent too long fighting his wife, too long trying to save someone who doesn't want to be saved, and she can't help but be irritated by such unfruitful persistence. Why can't he just come back to his family that's left, help them heal instead of abandoning them for so long, falling victim to the same trap he blamed his wife for? Why must they all be present to grieve their precious Verso? Alicia asks about him. Has her sister seen him in the canvas? Has she burdened him with the reality of his existence? But she only gets an irritated retort. He's not Verso. He's not her brother. Only an imitation, an imperfect copy created by her mother as part of her painted family. How ironic of her to find comfort in the same family she abandoned. How painful to see her live amongst copies of them made only to please her. The sisters have had enough. Their family must move on. It's time to destroy the canvas that tormented them for so long. Only by letting go of what's left of their beloved sibling will they be able to properly move on from his absence, an outcome he surely would have wanted. But first they must hide the canvas, and what better place to hide it than in one of Alicia's own creation? Surely this will delay Aline long enough for Renoir to erase the canvas before she re-enters. Clair is impressed by her sister's ingenuity. Perhaps she isn't as helpless as she might have assumed. She warns Alicia about the chroma contained in the canvas, as the essence controlled by her parents could easily overpower her if she isn't cautious enough. But despite Clair's warnings, Alicia is enveloped in her mother's chroma, erasing her prior memories and rebirthing her as one of her mother's creations.
Well, you're about to be reborn in this world as one of Aline's creations. Have fun. At least this will keep you out of trouble until I get back.
A red-haired woman is giving birth in a city we're all too familiar with, her husband staring lovingly at their newborn daughter. They won't have much time together, as they go maj only 3 years from now, but they'll cherish what little time they have nonetheless. With tears in her eyes, the woman begins speaking to her daughter, comforting her with words she won't yet understand, before finally deciding on a name.
And her name will be... Maëlle.
Act 2's ending is as melancholic as it is confusing. What's happening? Why did our characters go maj? Who was the paintress holding back? What's the meaning behind Alicia's epilogue? These are all questions I'm sure all of us had a burning desire to answer upon finishing Act 2, and I absolutely love how vague everything is on first witnessing it. We only fully understand one crucial detail, that the world we've been following, the characters we've gotten so attached to, and the various locations we've visited are all simply part of a painting, one painted by none other than Verso before his death, in the quote-unquote real world, and a painting that's been subjected to constant turmoil due to the Desandre family's infighting. However, this just leads to another question. Who are the Desandres, and what caused their falling out? Verso, Alicia, Clair, Renoir and Aline make up the members of this family, with them being part of the Painter faction, humans capable of creating life inside canvases. Aline was an extremely skilled painter, with her being the head of the Painters Council, though she now uses her talents for much more tragic purposes. Upon the death of her only son, in a fire orchestrated by an opposing faction, the Writers, for a seemingly unknown reason, she isolates herself in Verso's childhood creation, leaving the rest of her family to deal with their grief alone. The attack was originally directed at Alicia, but she was saved by Verso at the last minute, sacrificing his life to save his beloved sister, leaving her burned and scarred, unable to speak due to the injuries she endured, and crippled with the guilt of being the reason for her brother's demise. It all makes sense now. The visions we saw at the monolith, Aline passing her talents down to her children, the fire that took her beloved son's life, Renoir's failed attempts at reconciliation, and her rage at Alicia for taking her only son away from her. The grief Aline faced caused her to trap herself in the canvas. It became her refuge, a world where she could hold on to what little remained of her beloved Verso. In her sorrow, she creates Lumiere, a beautiful French city that mimics the grace of their own Paris, while avoiding the imperfections. Within it, she creates her family once again, free of the blemishes that now plague her own. Her son, her husband, her eldest daughter, perfect replicas created from Aline's memories. Finally, she's reunited with them once again. One member's creation, however, is not treated with the same loving grace. Alicia, the source of Aline's misery, is created with vengeful rage instead, her body laden with scars mirroring her Desandre counterpart, the imperfections amplified further by the pale gray color she's painted in. She couldn't even bother to give Alicia a proper skin color. All this to no fault of her own, but the sins committed by a doppelganger she hasn't even met. Despite this, they live together for some time, with Lumiere as a backdrop for Aline's fake familial life. She's ignored her responsibilities as the head of the Painters Council, as a wife to Renoir, and most importantly, as the lifeblood that held the Desandres together, in order to live a life that isn't her own, stringing along thousands of innocent lives in the process. In Renoir's own words, she's left them to drown in order to drown alone, and the pressure has gotten too much for him to bear. The future of the canvas is about to be challenged. The flow of time in the canvas is quite different from that of the real world, as a mere week in Paris could translate to multiple years in Lumiere. Plenty of time has passed since Lumiere's creation, allowing the citizens to flourish, creating their own governments, organizations, and cultures, all without Aline's intervention. Beings like the Gestrels and Grandis, who lived freely in Verso's canvas far before Aline's arrival, began to intermingle and interact with the Lumerians, allowing a rich civilization to bloom from a once abandoned world. These were bright times for Lumiere, though these same heights will unfortunately never be reached again. Renoir enters the canvas, finally deciding to intervene after his wife's prolonged absence. He makes his presence known by shattering the very continent Lumiere was a part of, in an event coined the Fracture by the Lumerians. Families are torn apart as they're separated across different land masses, with some staying where Lumiere originally was, while the others drift away until eventually reaching where we know the modern-day continent to be. The Gestrels and Grandis, who were once known members of society, were stranded on this newly formed continent, eventually fading into obscurity, only being remembered by the few who interacted with them before the Fracture. But undoubtedly, nothing that came of the Fracture was as horrific as the creation of the monolith, a massive tower piercing the clouds, with a giant number painted onto its surface, counting down from 100. The nature of the gommage was still unknown by now, as people that old likely did not exist so early into Lumiere's lifespan. However, as the citizens would soon find out, the gommage would take far more lives than any casualties endured during the initial Fracture. Many were lost during Renoir's devastating entrance, including Aline herself, so many in fact that the first ever expedition was assembled. However, this time they have quite a different goal. Expedition Zero was a search and rescue mission. a mission launched to find the many stranded on the continent. The expedition was commanded by Painted Renoir, desperate to find his beloved wife, ironic seeing how his mirror was pursuing the same goal. Aiding him were Painted Verso, Painted Clair, Simon, and Julie, alongside many other Lumerians, all in pursuit of reuniting with estranged loved ones, or finding closure in discovering their demise. They would be intercepted by Clea Desandre, having recently entered the canvas to aid her father. She would inform them of the reality of their existence, paintings in a canvas, merely created to please a grieving mother. She then attempted to kill the members of Expedition Zero, as to prevent them from meddling with her plans. However, due to Verso and Renoir's immortality being granted this gift from Aline herself, they survive her attack, though Painted Clair is not as lucky. She's captured by her Desandre counterpart, being imprisoned in the Flying Manor until further notice. Aline spends this time fighting Renoir, and due to her being the better painter, she eventually gains the upper hand, trapping him beneath the monolith, though this doesn't come without its price. In his isolation, Renoir begins to drain Aline of her chroma, forcing her to let go of her oldest creations, as he periodically erases the few he can every year. Renoir also creates the Axon Islands, furthering his influence on the continent even more. Despite being trapped, he can still muster what little power that remains in him to communicate with the expeditioners, now taking on the form of the curator, encouraging them to take down the paintress, who we now know to be Aline, thus freeing him from his captivity, allowing him to enact his full plan. Clair attempts to break this stalemate as she enslaves her painted self, forcing her to paint Nevrons for eternity, being set on killing all expeditioners they can, forcing their chroma to stay in their bodies, preventing it from returning to Aline and strengthening her further. Clea's interference isn't enough to tip the scale in Renoir's favor though, which leads her to instruct Alicia to enter the canvas and aid her father, breaking their mother free from her cycle of grief and allowing them to finally live together as a family once more, bringing us full circle to the end of Act 2. Ooh, that was a lot of exposition, but I found it necessary to cover the entirety of the canvas's origin so we can take a look at Act 2's ending knowing the full context behind the game's story. The transition between the two acts is easily the longest cutscene in the game, with it clocking in at almost half an hour, and despite how long it is, you still don't get the full picture of the canvas's creation. One thing is hard to miss though, the reveal that the canvas is merely a world created by painters, in an Inception-style nested reality. In hindsight, it makes sense, from the over-exaggerated beauty of some of the locations to the absence of any other countries or nationalities. This was without a doubt the most decisive part of the story for me, with it having some of the best writing in the entire game, but also some pitfalls I would have never expected given the game's stellar track record so far. Such a substantial reveal so far into the game risks cheapening the entire experience if it isn't expanded upon well enough, and unfortunately, I think a lot more could have been done to ease the player into this new and ambitious storyline. To prevent myself from falling into the trap of sounding overly negative, we'll begin with the good. The canvas reveal recontextualizes almost every interaction in Act 2 and forward, granting conversations beautiful double meanings and tragic foreshadowing. I alluded to this earlier when I covered Alicia's poem, which now turns from cryptic word salad to a sorrowful piece about coming to terms with your own false existence and envying those who have still not been burdened with the truth of their creation. Painted Renoir's final words to the curator as well being "I love them too," now referring to his painted family. He's grown to love them just as much as Renoir Desandre loves his family back home, but the tragic truth is only one of them gets to enjoy having their family whole again, and only one of them has the power to impose his will on the other. In fact, Painted Renoir's entire character is enhanced by these revelations. Instead of being a cold-hearted killer hanging on to his own prolonged life, he's a tormented father doing anything in his path to preserve the family he's been given. Every cruel or desperate act merely an attempt to protect a family he was created to love. What a tragic reality to endure. Renoir isn't the only character whose motivations are expanded upon though. Verso's insistence on disobeying his father and aiding the expeditions now becomes a lot less noble, knowing the consequences of Aline's removal are far worse than anything his father has done so far. Unlike Painted Renoir, Verso simply seeks a means to an end, his heart completely set on destroying the canvas, his motivations ironically aligning with his false father. He's lived for more than a century. He's bore witness to the constant fights of the Descendres and the vicious after effects said fights have on the citizens of Lumiere and the continent as a whole. He's acutely aware that he's merely living an echo of someone else's life, inheriting their personality and passions, also that the mother of a dead son can live out her ideal life. The fact that he still hasn't gone insane honestly speaks to just how strong Painted Verso's will is. Surely, burying everyone you've ever loved while simultaneously working towards ending your own life would have taken a toll on you. But when we meet Verso in-game, he's just as sharp and cunning as ever. This is what I mean when I say Act 3 has some of the best storytelling I've seen. The way everything cryptic about the game clicks after Act 2's ending, leading you to realize just how much of it was foreshadowed earlier, is genuinely some of the most fun I've had piecing together a narrative. Not just in video games, but in media in general. So many stories fall into the trap of being overly cryptic just for the sake of it, without proper ways to actually communicate the deeper meanings behind their events, requiring you to scour through countless wikis and lore videos just to get a grasp of what's going on. However, in Expedition 33, everything you need to get the full picture is right there. You just need to go looking for it. They achieved the ever so delicate balance of giving you just enough information to piece things together yourself, but not in a way that would come off as exposition heavy or on the nose. The total mastery of nonlinear storytelling on display here is something I think the writers should absolutely be applauded for, as the countless details and intricacies in the game's story are what kept me thinking about it long after the credits rolled. Unfortunately, however, I feel like the rest of Act 3 just doesn't do justice to the incredible narrative set up by the game thus far, and sacrifices the characters we've grown so attached to in favor of new ones thrust upon us in the final hours of the game. Essentially telling two stories at the same time, the story of Lumiere and the expeditions, and the story of the Descendres and their grief, would have needed much more time in my opinion. The fact that the bulk of Act 3's story is told in just one mission, a mission that's, by the way, the only main story mission in the entire act, is honestly baffling, as this is when I thought the game would slow down and focus on our characters and their reactions to Verso's repeated deception, as well as the reality of their painted world. The game makes a point to show us that Lumiere and its inhabitants being part of the canvas doesn't make them any less real, as we see they have actual lives to live out and dreams to work towards. But for some reason, during Act 3, they've been completely neglected in favor of telling the Descendre plot. Characters like Lune do eventually blame Verso for not telling them the truth, but for some odd reason she seems more annoyed at him for lying again, and not that he's literally been hiding the fact that their entire existence has been a lie. I also find it quite odd that they never confront Minoko or Eske about not telling them either, seeing as both of them were on board with Verso's plan from the get-go and also knew about the canvas. I think my problems with Act 3 can be boiled down to just one core issue: our characters' lack of reaction. So far, we've been able to see the impact of every mission on our core team, as well as building each one of them up individually through the relationship system. However, in Act 3, barely anyone outside of Verso and Mael react to anything, which instantly makes them feel less real. Earlier in the video, I praised Act 1 and 2 for giving each expeditioner the appropriate amount of spotlight, making each of them feel equally important, but unfortunately, this quality didn't carry over to Act 3. Let's take Julie and Verso's audio logs for example. Julie is one of the most mysterious characters in the game by far, with her being the woman we see Verso kill in Mael's visions. Her audio log, however, tells us that she was part of the same expedition as Verso. She goes on to say that after an attack on them, she was sure that she saw Verso be impaled in the chest, only for him to emerge unscathed the day later, gaslighting them into believing what they saw was merely an illusion and that he was never a victim to such an attack. This leads them to capturing Verso for interrogation, only for him to kill them all in self-defense. Verso's log is a different beast entirely, and is our biggest clue in finding out what Verso was like before we arrived on the continent. He begins by apologizing to Julie, promising her that he'll have his mother bring everyone back once he removes Renoir Descendre from the canvas. You can tell from the way he speaks about Julie that there was obviously something between the two, perhaps even before Expedition Zero, as this audio log is one of the few instances where Verso displays this much emotion.
Clair already took our sister. If we want to save our family, our world, our people, we can't take any chances. And once we free Mama, she'll bring you back. It won't be forever. I promise.
This is probably the most lore-dense audio log in the entire game. We not only learn that Verso had a love interest during his time on the continent, but that he was initially on board with aiding his mother in her battle against Renoir and restoring the canvas to its original state, standing in stark contrast to his current motivations. What is our character's reaction to this information, though?
Verso.
Let's go.
Not a question from Lune, not a word of consolation from Ciel, literally nothing. We've had campfire scenes for way less important discoveries, and I feel like the least our characters could have done is question Verso about this after returning to base, but we get no such interaction. Another instance of this phenomenon is when entering the optional Dark Shores area, the place where our expedition first landed, and where Renoir slaughtered the majority of their team. This beach definitely brings back some painful memories, and you'd expect Lune, Ciel, and Maëlle to at least be a bit hesitant before entering it. Maybe they take note of the many remnants of the previous failed expeditions, from the crashed ships to the corpses of their teammates. However, our team once again remains silent for the entire area, not even a single line of dialogue throughout the entire thing. When visiting the Flying Manor as well, our team discovered the existence of Painted Clair, now enslaved by her Desandre counterpart to paint Nevrons for eternity. Yet nobody on the team questions this. Lune and Ciel don't even know who Clair is, for crying out loud. But when she's eventually slain, nobody bats an eye at the fact that Verso literally had a second sister he never told them about. You may think these are just cherry-picked examples. Surely the rest of the team isn't completely neglected for Act 3, and you'd only be partially right. But instead of having 33 actually converse about what's happening around them, we instead get more relationship cutscenes delving deeper into their own personal struggles. I would have no problem with this if it weren't for the canvas-sized elephant in the room. The world is literally imploding around our characters, with Renoir free to do what he pleases with the canvas now that Aline is gone. Our characters should be rushing to save it before thinking of anything else. Having the rest of the relationship scenes take place in Act 3 just makes no narrative sense in my opinion. Lune should not just now be asking Verso if he's traveled with her parents before. Minoko should have tried to bring back Noko much earlier. And Verso definitely should not have the time to literally give Ciel swimming lessons while the entire fate of the canvas is at stake. And the biggest issue is that outside of a few interactions between Maëlle and Verso, nobody ever addresses the fact that they're painted creations. I mean, a character like Lune should have been teeming with questions. Her entire understanding of the world has been flipped on its head. She should be flooding Verso and Maëlle with question after question every moment she has, but for some reason she just doesn't. They just found out that they were merely created as a backdrop for a grieving mother, the same one who then abandons them when her furious husband comes crashing down. They didn't ask to exist. They didn't ask to suffer through the gommage every year. They should be furious at the painters. How dare these false gods play around with their lives so carelessly? But unfortunately, we get none of that. They just continue on with their lives like nothing happened, and it makes them feel so much less grounded because of it. It isn't all bad though, as we do get some genuinely touching scenes during Act 3, with the final scenes between SK, Minoko, and Maëlle especially being some of my favorites. We get a scene of Verso asking Minoko why he stuck with him for so long, why aid him in his journey to erase everything and leave everyone he loves behind. But Minoko replies by expressing that it's what real Verso would have wanted. He wouldn't have wished that his family live out the rest of their lives fighting over his canvas. He would have wanted them to honor his death and continue onward with their lives, not grieve endlessly over his absence, but to cherish their memories of him and move on. These glimpses we get of what Verso Desandre was like before his untimely demise are genuinely interesting, and it's a shame we didn't get more of these scenes. If some of the relationship scenes that don't fit would have been moved to Act 2, And if we would have gotten more dialogue during the optional story missions in Act 3, I genuinely think it could have topped Act 2 and became my favorite act in the entire game. But as it stands now, I just don't think it did a good job of balancing the incredibly well-written Desandre plot with our character's ongoing development. It certainly isn't bad to the point of ruining the game, but it is a blemish on what was so far a near perfect story in my opinion. But can Act 3 stick the landing and deliver an emotionally impactful ending to make up for its lack of story missions, or will it fall flat, failing to wrap up so many storylines at the same time? Let's find out for ourselves, shall we? Maëlle returns to Lumiere, having now regained the memories of her life as a painter. She arrives to find Verso sitting alone in the town square, and she slowly sits down next to him. He calls her by her real name, Alicia, though she remarks that she now prefers the name Maëlle, showing just how attached she's grown to the canvas. They converse for a bit, with Maëlle apologizing to Verso for her mother's actions, and for bringing him into a world he didn't ask to be in. She attempts to comfort him with the fact that despite him being merely a copy of someone else, his experiences and relationships shaped him into a different person entirely, and that she's grown to love that person despite his differences from her beloved brother. Her show of affection has no effect on Verso though, who remarks that the optimal outcome would have been for Renoir to erase the canvas altogether, much to Maëlle's dismay. She convinces Verso to come with her, to attempt to convince Renoir to spare the canvas and leave, reasoning that she hid the canvas well enough that Aline won't find it if she attempts to re-enter. But Verso remains skeptical, yet follows her anyways. They make their way to the curator, who now reveals his true form, a tired yet fulfilled Renoir, having finally reached the goal he spent so long in the canvas trying to achieve. Maëlle rushes towards him, happy to finally see her father after so long, and the two embrace for the first time since the fracture. Verso stands awkwardly, watching them from afar. Despite how similar this man is to his own father, Verso has no relation to this counterpart. Renoir notices Verso's uneasiness, and remarks at how masterfully Aline painted him, a spitting image of his beloved son. He apologizes that Verso was brought into this all, realizing the cruelty of forcing someone to live a life that isn't theirs, and assures Verso that after his mission is complete, he won't have to suffer a life he doesn't want any longer. He thanks Maëlle for her role in removing Aline from the canvas, and asks her to assist him in erasing what's left of her deceased brother's painting, still unaware of Maëlle's opposition to his mission. This startles Maëlle, who now realizes the finality of her father's decision, and she begs him to let her stay in the canvas for just a bit longer. She assures him that Aline won't be able to re-enter due to it being in her canvas, not realizing the futility of her efforts. Renoir knows this well, and remarks that as long as the canvas remains, Aline won't stop chasing the last remnant of her son's life. Maëlle begs him once again to not erase the home she's grown so attached to not plunge everyone and everything she's grown to love into oblivion, but this only reinforces Renoir's decision. This isn't her home, the Lumerians aren't her family, but he is. In fact, her being so attached to the canvas is merely an unintended consequence of her memories being erased. She was supposed to be here to aid him, not impede him. He reminds her that every day she spends in the canvas has a price, the constant draining of her real-life self, the same decaying that almost cost him his wife. However, this doesn't matter to Maëlle anymore. This is her life now, whether Renoir likes it or not. Upon realizing the tragic similarity between his wife and his daughter, and their susceptibility to the allure of the canvas, Renoir begins his assault on Lumiere. Aberrations and mighty creations flood the street, demonstrating just how powerful Renoir really is. He begins to gomage Verso, finally granting him the fate he's wished for so long. However, that fate is tragically stolen from him when he's restored by Maëlle, who recently relearned how to paint herself. SK and Monoko swoop in, noticing the chaos now unfolding in Lumiere, as Maëlle and Verso join them, but not before Maëlle retrieves Lune and Ciel's chroma, still fresh from the recent gomage, and the team head back to camp one final time. As many complaints as I have with Act 3, the intro definitely isn't one of them. It establishes each character's motivation so quickly and clearly, with Renoir insistent on erasing the canvas, and Maëlle on saving it, leaving you free to side with whoever character you sympathize with the most. Someone whose motivations aren't quite as clear-cut though is Verso. You'd think he'd be completely on Renoir's side at this point, with their motivations aligning almost perfectly. If the canvas were to be erased, Renoir would get his wife and daughter back, and painted Verso wouldn't have to live the rest of his life in the shadow of someone else. Yet something seems to be stopping him from crossing that line. The most likely culprit in my opinion may be Alicia's letter, a one he tragically opened a bit too late. Her pleas for both families to coexist have fallen on deaf ears until now, but maybe Verso has the power to change that now that he has a painter on his side. Another thing I love is just how similar both Renoirs are in essence. Even though Renoir de Sandre appears to be much kinder than his painted counterpart at first, the two ultimately resort to the same actions when faced with their children's disobedience. Except this time, instead of it being Verso, it's Maëlle. It seems that Aline's painting reflected her husband perfectly, as we see his love for his family on full display, his stubbornness to preserve it only matched by his daughter's fiery will. I find myself sympathizing with this Renoir even more than his painted self. The pain of not only losing your son, but having to fight your own wife for 67 years just so you can get a chance to move on as a family is honestly heartbreaking. And just when you think you've finally gotten your family back together, you watch your own daughter fall into the same vicious cycle you know oh so well. She chose the canvas over him, just like Aline did. At that point, you don't see Lumiere as a living, breathing city. You don't see the deadly beauty of the continent and its inhabitants. You don't see the canvas as a legitimate world. All merely obstacles in the way, a wall preventing you from reuniting with the family you hold so dear. It doesn't justify the suffering Renoir inflicted on the people of the canvas, but how do you tell a grieving father to let go of what little remains of his fractured family? Back at our ever so familiar campsite, we see Maëlle attempting to bring back Lune and Ciel via their chroma, with Eske and Minoko cheering her on. She remarks at how easy her father made chroma manipulation look, when in actuality it's much harder than it seems. After many failed attempts, Verso guides Maëlle through it, with him still retaining Verso de Sandre's memories of how to paint. And finally, Ciel and Lune emerge in a flurry of rose petals. They're justifiably confused on how they're still alive, their memory of the gommage still intact, but Maëlle explains the situation. Upon learning the truth, Lune confronts Verso about his betrayal, while Ciel asks Maëlle if this means they can bring everyone they've lost back, with each of their reactions reflecting their personalities quite well. And after they get over the initial shock of Maëlle's revelation, they begin planning their mission to return to Lumiere, defeat Renoir, and help Maëlle regain control of the canvas, allowing her to freely manipulate the chroma now commanded by her father. They formulate a plan to gather chroma from the expeditioners killed by Nevrons, using it to create an army of apparitions strong enough to face Renoir's creations. And after one final trek through the continent, our team launches the greatest expedition in history. Except they kinda don't. See, at this point in the game, the only mission standing between you and completing it is Lumiere, the one the narrative has been building up towards for the past 3 hours or so. But obviously, one mission isn't enough to fill an entire act's worth of gameplay, which brings me to another issue I have with Act 3. For some reason, instead of having maybe 2 or 3 story missions before the final one, we instead get almost 6 missions worth of entirely gameplay-focused side content. Frozen Hearts, Flying Manor, Renoir's Drafts, Dark Shores, The Reachers, so many new locations are free to explore. Yet I can't help but feel it just doesn't belong in Act 3. The pacing of the game slows down to a crawl if you choose to engage with any of the side content. Instead of quickly heading to Lumiere to stop the literal end of the world, no, let's go fight Lampmaster for the 4th time. The way it's structured leads to so much ludo-narrative dissonance that I honestly don't even know if letting us access so much content at this point is the right call. Maybe instead of having so many optional missions, we could have had a couple where we actually go and gather the necessary chroma ourselves, instead of just having it be in a montage. Maybe we'd have to seek out Painted Clair, given her affinity for manipulating chroma, only to find her a husk of her former self, thus turning the Flying Manor from a side mission to an important story destination, with the proper dialogue and cutscenes to go with it. After that, they look for Alicia, seeking her help in The Reacher, better integrating that mission into the main storyline, instead of the way it is now where Maëlle sort of just stumbles upon Alicia's letter somehow. Maybe in a final attempt to find enough chroma, the team venture deep into Renoir's Drafts, maybe fighting an unfinished Axon, one Renoir created during his prolonged isolation under the monolith, who then grants them enough chroma to face him. I know this is asking for more content in an already content-rich game, and surely the developers would have thought of better ideas than mine if it weren't for time and budget constraints. But I feel like the content that is there could have been condensed into something more concise and story relevant. Because the way it is now, I feel like you're given one of two options. Either face Renoir first and be presented with an underwhelmingly short final act, or do the side content and be faced with an admittedly entertaining yet ultimately disjointed final stretch. Act 3's awkward pacing doesn't mean there's no good character moments though, as in addition to the scenes with Minoko I mentioned earlier, the last interaction between Mael and Verso is just perfect in my opinion. They spend a moment wondering what Aline might be doing now that she's back at home, and the heated arguments she might be having with Clair. Verso remarks that he's only met real Clair 3 times. The first where she revealed the truth of the canvas to him, another where she recruited him into her fight to stop Aline, and the last time being 16 years ago, right when Mael entered the canvas. He's been keeping an eye on her ever since, protecting her during her time on the continent, saving her from Painted Renoir's attack, leaving messages to guide Luna and Gustav to her location, and clearing the dangerous Nevrons from her path. This comes as a complete shock to Mael, and a question begins eating away at her. If Verso had been so close to them this entire time, why couldn't he save Gustav? Could Verso even do such a thing? Let someone so close to her perish just to achieve his goals? Would asking such a question even give her closure? But the urge becomes too strong for her to resist, and she asks Verso the fateful question. And in a rare moment of honesty, Verso tells her the truth. Yes, he left Gustav to die so Mael wouldn't get too attached to the canvas. He used her desire to avenge him as a way to get her to fight Aline, fabricating Renoir's motivations in the process. Everything he's done has been to further his goal of getting Aline out of the canvas, and despite how heartless it may seem, he ultimately achieved his goal in the end. Mael is speechless, devastated that Verso could have done such a thing, though given his desperation to get her on his side, she can see why he would resort to such extremes. Verso apologizes for not telling her sooner, but expresses no regret in his decision, and that he'd do anything to save his mother. She thanks him for his honesty, and seems weirdly unfazed after having discovered something so tragic, and the two spend some time together, their bond growing deeper thanks to Verso's newfound honesty. This scene alone perfectly encapsulates the contrast between their characters. Verso, despite not being a Descendre himself, does anything he can to ensure their safety, going as far as killing his own father just so Aline could be saved before succumbing to the canvas. Even his desire to stop living, a goal that you might find selfish at first, is motivated by his love for his family, not wanting them to spend their days fighting over the husk of their son. He knows that him existing, a near perfect replica of the person they miss the most, would be too much for Aline and Mael to resist. Why grieve Verso's death if they could just spend their days with him instead? Because despite Mael claiming to view Painted Verso as his own person, she still treats him as if he were her brother. The only way for them to properly move on, to exit their never-ending cycle of grief, is if he is completely out of the equation. Mael, on the other hand, wants to prolong the cycle. Why live a life where you're burnt and scarred, not even being able to muster a sentence, having to cope with the fact that you're the reason why your brother is dead? Why deal with that when you can play God in an ideal paradise, filled with people who you love and who love you, where death is a mere construct controlled by you? Now people like Gustav, Sophie, Pierre, all of them can be brought back with your newfound power. And the cherry on top of it all, your brother, the person whose loss affected you the most, right in there waiting for you. Of course you wouldn't take the hard route of moving on and healing properly. Healing takes months, sometimes years. Who knows if the life that remains for you after that is even worth it? At that point, why care that your real body is slowly dying? You didn't even want to live in it in the first place. Verso seeks an end, while Mael seeks an escape. Both are motivated by love, and both are doomed by it. The team finally arrive at Lumiere, with it now drenched in dark chroma. Renoir's creations wreak havoc on the once beautiful city, which prompts Mael to conjure the chroma she's gathered, with grey constructs of dead expeditioners emerging to face Renoir's army. They find him standing by himself, overseeing Lumiere's destruction. Mael pleads to him one last time to spare Verso's canvas, much to Renoir's frustration. He too knows the allure of the canvas, how immersed one can get in a life that isn't theirs, but it's that knowledge that makes him fear even more for Mael's safety. Even though he doesn't want to, destroying the canvas is the only option Mael and Aline have left him with. Mael claims that the pain of losing Verso is just too much for her to handle, and that it would be impossible for her to find joy in anything after an event so tragic, but Renoir promises her that in time things will get better. She will hate him for destroying the canvas, but that's a sacrifice he's willing to make. But Mael remains unrelenting, and Renoir has run out of wisdoms to give. His daughter is too far gone, and she's left him with no other option. The team begin to reluctantly draw their weapons, getting a familiar, disappointed glance from Renoir, and with one final tap of his cane, he engulfs them in rose petals, transforming the landscape around them in a mighty display of his power. He morphs into his familiar form, the Curator, a form much more suitable for combat. He conjures a brush, a tool just as suited for creation as it is for destruction. He summons the Axons, Seren, Visage, the Reacher, and the Hauler, the essence of his wife, his son, and his 2 daughters. They allow him to fight indefinitely, with Seren saving him every time he's close to losing. Our team gets tired of this stalemate and begin to plan how they might take the Axons out, but they're interrupted by a portal opening above them. From it emerges none other than Aline, having found the canvas despite Mael's efforts to hide it, much to her surprise. Aline's construct emerges, and she engages with Seren, preventing her from helping Renoir any longer. Verso looks up in complete despair. Everything he's worked for has been undone in this very moment, yet he's fighting the one person who can truly help him. Maybe he isn't on the correct side after all. With his wife fighting the Axons and his daughter fighting him, Renoir can no longer sustain this fight, and with one final strike from Mael, her father is defeated. Renoir contemplates the irony of it all. It was Aline who once saved him when he got lost in a canvas of his creation, taught him how to harness his power without losing himself in the process. How tragic it must be then to see her fall into the same trap. He can't leave her behind, not after all they've been through. He reveals the reason why he's persisted for so long, why his will to save his wife never dimmed over the 67 years she had him trapped, as he opens a portal to the real world, revealing Aline, stumbling around, barely able to walk, a mere husk of her former self. Renoir closes the portal, hoping that seeing her mother in such a state would rouse something in Mael. He cannot go on like this, not when his family is so torn apart. Aline succumbing to the canvas, Clair caught up in her war with the writers, and Alicia caught in the crossfire of it all. He cannot lose them again. But despite everything she's witnessed, Mael still wants to stay in the canvas. She feels as attached to its inhabitants as Renoir is to his family. Destroying it won't help her get better, it'll only push her off the edge. She assures Renoir that she'll use the canvas wisely, spending just enough time to help her heal from the horrors she's witnessed. She begs her father to trust her, to let her stay for just a bit longer, and finally Renoir begins to yield. Seeing his daughter in this state pains him even more than leaving her in the canvas. Maybe letting her stay might not be such a bad thing after all. Renoir reluctantly lets go of Mael, assuring her that he'll be waiting on the other side. And after 67 monolith years, Renoir de Sandre finally returns home. The Curator boss is, in my opinion, the single best boss fight in the entire game, and one I haven't got tired of no matter how many times I replay it. The story and gameplay come together in such a way that it crescendos into an absolutely unforgettable experience. Themes of family, grief, and refusing to let go are explored so thoroughly here, from Renoir's pleas to his wife to return home, to his final decision to let Mael stay. So much character work is done in what's supposed to be a gameplay-focused final encounter, but it's that fine balance of narrative influencing the gameplay that truly makes this fight something special. A common theme throughout the fight is Renoir finding strength in his family. Not only is he fighting for them to reunite, but the whole reason he's here is out of fear for their safety. It's this constant, immovable desire that keeps him pushing onward, accomplishing feats of strength he didn't think possible. No better is this expressed than the beginning of his second phase, where we see him summon a family portrait of the Desandres. But instead of just having it be a cool spectacle, Renoir instead cuts it open and enters it, emerging with every major buff in the game. I mean, how cool is that? Not only does the portrait serve as a reminder to Renoir of what he's fighting for, no doubt reigniting his will to get his family back together, but it literally makes him stronger in-game, letting the player feel firsthand just how desperate Renoir is becoming. This next part I've alluded to a bit in my recap, but when Renoir summons the Axons, I think it symbolizes him seeking help from the only parts of his family willing to offer it. In addition to attacking us themselves, each of them aid Renoir in some way. Visage helps Renoir by applying shields to him, a mask for Renoir to hide behind. I see these masks as symbolizing Verso, and the many masks he's willing to hide behind to avoid telling the truth, and the intricate lies he weaves in order to further his goals. But then you have the Reacher, who buffs Renoir, allowing him to reach his full potential, just how Renoir wanted Alicia to reach for the stars and follow her dreams. Seren, on the other hand, heals Renoir, allowing him to far surpass his natural limit, surely drawing a parallel to his current predicament. He would have given up long ago had it not been for his love for Aline. Who knows if he would have survived the canvas's draining had it not been for his undying will. How fitting it is then for the Axon that symbolizes her to be the one that brings him back when he's on the brink of death. I may be reaching a bit with my interpretations, because how do you explain the Hauler? She kinda just throws a building at us. But I feel like so much of the game is intentional that I doubt they would have missed a chance like this to enhance the themes even further. No doubt my favorite moment in the fight is Renoir's last hurrah, the last unique attack he has before eventually being defeated. He flies around the arena, begging Aline to stop, while simultaneously visiting the Axons, taking Visage's masks, Seren's dress, and the Reacher's wings, before unleashing a devastating flurry of blows. The attention to detail here is absolutely insane, and this little detail completely blew my mind when I first noticed it. Not only is this an incredibly cool spectacle, but it further reinforces my point of Renoir drawing strength from those he loves the most. I've rarely seen a game's narrative and gameplay intertwine so masterfully. It takes advantage at every story piece at its disposal to craft a truly awesome final encounter. And after playing so many games that fumble their final moments, it's truly refreshing to say that Expedition 33 saves the best for last. Maëlle begins to revel in the freedom she's longed for ever since she regained her memories. Finally, she can live her best life. Gustave and her friends can now live eternal. Lumiere can be restored to its prime. But she's forgetting someone whose suffering equally matches her own, someone who's been reluctant about helping her this entire time, and someone who just recently made up their mind.
I'm sorry.
Verso enters the canvas's heart, taking in the chaotic beauty of the source of their existence. Painted creations aren't meant to survive in such conditions, but ironically, it's Aline's own immortality that allows him to persist. The room is empty, except for a young boy leaning over a canvas, shaping the swirling ink to his will, the same boy we've been seeing throughout the entire game. It's Verso Desandre, or at least what remains of him, the one who's been fueling the canvas this entire time. Painted Verso kneels down next to him, surely feeling sympathy for the young boy. He asks him if he's tired of painting, to which the boy nods his head, aware of the cycle he's helping perpetuate. Maëlle enters, asking Verso why he chose to enter a place so dangerous, but he only replies by quoting his father.
See things as they are, not how you want them to be.
What?
He calls her out for lying to her father. She doesn't plan on leaving anytime soon. Renoir saw it too, but he wanted so desperately to trust her that he let her have her way regardless, and Mael doesn't even try to deny it. He asks her why she doesn't just leave and paint another canvas, or come back to this one when things have simmered down, but she says that the threat of Renoir erasing the canvas is too big for her to leave it unattended. Verso urges Mael to live her true life, to leave this chapter behind. Staying here will only lead to her being too attached to the comfort of this painted world, too scared to deal with the consequences of the fire, and too far gone to consider anything other than dying in the canvas. But that's exactly what she wants. There's nothing waiting for her out there other than broken dreams and painful days. Why would she condemn herself to live in a dying husk of a body? Verso stares at her apathetically. It's never going to end, is it? She's become a spitting image of her mother, trapped in the same cycle he spent oh so long preventing. There's no convincing her now. He reaches out to Verso's soul one last time before being stopped by Mael. He cannot be allowed to stop painting. She draws her weapon, leaving Verso no choice but to do the same. It's time for the fate of the canvas to be decided.
I'm sorry.
Mael overcomes Verso, and we see him fall to his knees. In his last moments, he begs Mael to stop the boy from painting. She has no idea the pain it causes him to do so. The canvas shudders as if to confirm his suffering, and he begins to go mage.
Please, listen to me. Only you can do this. You can do this, please. Unpaint me. Unpaint me.
He begs her to unpaint him, as if it were Verso's soul speaking through him. He begs her over and over. He doesn't want this life. He doesn't want to watch his family be torn apart because of him. But Mael only begs him to stop. She doesn't want to be reminded of the pain it causes him to exist. Her brother, because that's all he'll ever be to her, a living corpse. How tragic for this to be the last thought on his mind. And in his dying breath, all he can say is,
Help me.
Some time has passed since her father left the canvas, enough time for Lumiere to return to its previous state. The opera house is reopened, with Monoko and Esque greeting incoming guests. Ciel, Pierre, and Lune are sitting in the front row, and Lune rushes excitedly to meet Mael. She signals to Gustave and Sophie to come sit next to her, and they engage in some pre-show banter before settling down into their seats. The show is about to begin though, and the hall falls silent in anticipation. A man emerges from behind the stage curtains. Verso, now aged considerably, walks towards his favorite instrument as the crowd cheers him on. Yet, what was once his passion now seems tiring to him, almost painful, and he struggles to find the will to play the opening notes. They're waiting for him. Ciel and Lune smile at him softly, but his eyes drift to one person and one person alone. Mael, her hollow, decaying eyes tormenting him, slowly dying to the canvas. Surely this isn't the only way this story ends. Verso bests Mael, and she falls to her knees, unwilling to believe that it's come to this. Verso assures her that things will be okay, that she'll eventually get over the pain of losing him, a pain that she'll never overcome if she's unwilling to let him go now. Mael gasps for air, unable to speak. She clutches Verso's hand, desperately trying to hold on to this world, refusing to leave the last piece of her brother behind, but Verso leaves her no choice. And after one last tearful whimper, Alicia Desandre leaves the canvas behind. Verso stands up, having finally fulfilled his goal, and he turns around to see Minoka and Eske waiting for him. They embrace, and despite Verso's torment, he can't help but feel a twinge of sadness when they say goodbye for the last time, and just like that, his dearest friends begin to fade away. Ciel enters as well, her eyes piercing right through him. He betrayed her, yet she can't bring herself to despise him. He reaches out for her, and she returns the gesture, her final moments lingering in Verso's mind. But there's one person who isn't as understanding, one who isn't so forgiving of his betrayal, one who isn't ready for the world to end. Lune stares at Verso with unbridled hatred. She wanted so badly to believe in him, but that belief became her undoing. The weight of this realization chokes her, as she sits down instead of entering the canvas's heart, refusing to even be in the same room as Verso. But the deed has already been done, and Verso reaches out to the boy. It's over. He no longer has to suffer a life he doesn't want. And for the first time in forever, Verso's soul is at rest. A melancholic wind brushes over the Desandre manor, as rose petals sweep over their son's grave. Renoir is the first to pay his respects, and he feels the weight of his son's loss loom heavy over him. Aline approaches him, and the two share a moment of silent mourning, a moment they should have had long ago. Alicia stands idly next to them, clutching her brother's doll, and Clair comes along to lay a bouquet of flowers on Verso's grave. His family is together at last. They can now move on, not divided by grief, but united in it. Renoir embraces his wife, their spark now rekindled, as they comfort each other after all they've been through. Alicia stares onward, seeing her painted family waving at her. She spent a lifetime with them, laughing, crying, grieving, a lifetime she's been forced to end. They're gone forever, and while the pain of losing them might feel overwhelming now, her brother would have wanted her to continue on without him. Even in death, Verso always seems to be looking out for her. And with that comes the end of Expedition 33, and what a beautiful end it is. It single-handedly saves Act 3 in my eyes, delivering the perfect finale for a game like this. How fitting for a story entirely focused on grief and its consequences, to have both endings reflect how one might deal with such a loss. This is the single best instance of multiple endings I have ever seen. The sheer investment people have in each ending, and the endless discourse online around which character is morally correct, is unlike anything I've ever encountered in media before. Even I am guilty of this. As you could probably tell from my narration, I'm heavily biased towards Verso's ending. But that doesn't prevent me from realizing that reaching an objective conclusion on which ending is better is nigh impossible. That won't stop me from trying, however, as I do think I have a few things to bring to the table regarding the ending discussion. But before we dive headfirst into analyzing each of the two endings, I first want to take a look at a character we've neglected so far. The fading boy is the living manifestation of what remains of Verso's soul, and has been a looming presence throughout our entire journey. We meet him as far back as the Ancient Sanctuary, where his dialogue seems to suggest that he's more of a neutral observer rather than an active player in the canvas's fate. He claims that he can't remember why he's even here, or why he did all of this, most likely referring to the creation of the canvas. He goes on to say that he misses laughing with everyone, even referring to Renoir and Clair, though due to his fading memory, he can only remember the first couple letters of each of their names. We meet him again at the Yellow Harvest, where he expresses great sadness over Clair's decision to create the World Eater Nevrons. Nevrons whose sole purpose is to consume and destroy everything in their path. Watching the canvas that was once his pride and joy be destroyed by the same person who helped him create it has deeply affected him, and he's ultimately powerless to do anything against it. All he can do is wish that things would go back to how they were. Already we can see a trend forming from just these two interactions. A once hopeful and joyous soul, now overcome with nostalgia for a canvas that'll never be restored. His childlike sense of wonder and curiosity slowly fading, leaving behind a confused and tormented apparition. One trait persists through it all, however, his love for the creations he helped bring into being. He grieves for the expeditioners killed by his sister's Nevrons. He feels anguish over painted Clair's fate. In his eyes, everything in the canvas deserves to live. He just can't understand why his family can't see things the way he does. They claim to love Verso more than anything, yet abandon the last remaining piece of him, ignoring his desires to pursue their own selfish agendas. Maella insists on not destroying the canvas, under the guise of respecting young Verso's creation. But if that really were the case, she wouldn't have desecrated his canvas by insisting on staying in it. This constant neglection of Verso's desires seems to have driven him to complete apathy, his world now twisted beyond recognitions by the ones closest to him. Most tragic of all, however, he's acutely aware that he directly fuels his family's conflict, as the canvas cannot exist without him. He seems torn between preserving the art he's grown so attached to, or letting it go for the sake of his family's healing. His inner conflict reaches its apex when we meet him in Lumiere, where he admires the beauty of his mother's painted city. He says he wishes Aline knew what it meant for him to paint, which I read as him suffering immensely to maintain this world. Maybe that suffering is actual physical pain, or the emotional pain of having to prolong your family's cycle of grief, or perhaps even a mix of both. But regardless of what it may be, it seems like endlessly toiling away at his painting has taken a toll on the poor boy. Painting should be treated as an art, not as a means to stoke a waning world. He values his creation dearly, but watching it be used like this isn't what he wanted. He seems to wish to keep this world going, but he knows that by him existing, and by extension his canvas, his family would never give themselves the proper chance to heal. By the time we meet him at the Eiffel Tower, he seems to have come to this conclusion. He has taken Renoir's side fully, saying that Renoir is doing what he can no longer do anymore. Only by taking the painful step of erasing the canvas can his family begin to heal their wounds and his weary soul be laid to rest. Understanding young Verso's mental state allows us to beautifully transition into his ending. For the first time ever, Verso's soul is given the choice to stop painting, the only time he's been given autonomy by anyone. And how poetic for that person to be, well, Verso. Who better to understand the young boy than himself? Their suffering so intertwined, so related that they've almost become one and the same. They both went through the same stages of reluctance, with them first wanting to preserve the canvas, then becoming hesitant to erase it, and finally reaching the same conclusion. Their family needs to learn to move on from them, even if it comes at the cost of their own existence. And ultimately, it seems like they were right, as later on we see Renoir and Aline finally together after years apart in the canvas, and Alicia seems to be at peace with letting go of her painted life, albeit she still has a long way to go when it comes to moving on completely. The biggest victims in all of this are no doubt the citizens of Lumiere. They've done nothing but suffer tremendous loss every year, and in the end they're condemned to die anyways. But the harsh reality is, they were already dead the instant Renoir first entered the canvas. The moment Renoir realizes that his daughter lied to him, he'll go back to destroy the canvas, except this time there's nobody powerful enough to hold him back. And even if Renoir will leave them alone, is the life they're condemned to now even worth living? They will forever be at the mercy of a teenager with a god complex. The same one who so carelessly brought back someone who begged her to stay dead. She brought back people who were long dead of natural causes. Gustave's resurrection perhaps could be understood, seeing how him dying is the entire reason she's so insistent on bringing everyone back. But bringing back Sophie and Pierre? Really? These people have already been grieved, respects given, wounds healed. You can't just bring people back from the dead. The way it is now, Mael isn't trading one life for another. She's actively choosing to drown herself in a world she controls. Having such a difference in power between her and the other Lumerians is something I don't think a lot of people realize the consequences of. An emotionally immature teenager could easily justify bringing someone back from the dead under the guise of compassion. Why should Gustav suffer without his loved one when Mael can so easily just bring her back? But that logic is quite the slippery slope. Loss is an essential part of growing up, and our ability to deal with it is part of what makes us human. But how can we properly do that when there's always the option of undoing any tragedy? Mael is essentially treating life like a comic book, a fantasy where death is reversible and grief is optional. But the consequences of living like that will no doubt cause her far more harm than learning to deal with her grief naturally. But perhaps a third outcome was possible, the same outcome Verso was fighting Renoir for. Otherwise, it would make no sense for him to oppose the person directly aiding his goals. In this ideal scenario, Verso would be unpainted, Mael would learn how to use the canvas responsibly, and the people of Lumiere would live on, now free from the gommage. Even Verso's soul would now be free to paint without his family disrupting his canvas. I think you already may be drawing a parallel to the outcome Painted Alicia desired in her letter. A cry for both worlds to coexist. A desperate plea for Mael to avoid the mistakes of her family and forge her own path, finally achieving the balance Alicia had been dreaming of. But that's all it'll ever be, a dream, one that'll never come true while all parties are this selfish. Aline and Mael desperately holding on to the canvas, Renoir holding on to Aline and Mael, and Clair consumed by her vendetta against the writers, none of them willing to consider any other options. Alicia's dream would have needed the Desandres to be on much better terms, for them to have the mental capacity to sit down and discuss what's best for them and their creations. But tragically, the conditions just aren't there. A wild card ought to have been introduced to break their stalemate, someone who'd put the safety of his family above anything else, and someone willing to make the brutal sacrifices needed to achieve that goal. Painted Verso isn't a hero. He lies, kills, and manipulates, but everything he's ever done was in service of his loved ones. He breaks down completely when his sister chooses to rot in the canvas. He begs her to go, and when that fails, he begs her to kill him. He'd rather die than watch his sister slowly decay before his eyes. And even when he's brought back, all he can focus on is Alicia. He is the only one willing to accept the cost of grief, to put everything on the line for his family. Verso Desandre may have died in the fire, but this part of him lives on even in death. You can love him, you can despise him, but all I can feel is sympathy towards who I believe to be the true protagonist in this story, and one of the best written characters in all of fiction. It feels surreal to have finally finished this behemoth of a video. I've been working on it ever since I finished the game in August, and planned to have this video done by December before the Game Awards. But as you can probably tell from the upload date, I missed that deadline by quite a lot. Taking on such a massive project right before starting my engineering degree was probably not the right call in hindsight, but what can you do? I think the praise this game has gotten since speaks volumes to just how special it is, with it being the most awarded game in history and whatnot, and hopefully I was able to do it justice. Looking back, there's definitely some parts of this video that would have benefited from a redo, but at that rate it would have never been done. And hopefully, in a sea of low-effort content and reaction bait, I hope my video can serve as one of the more tasteful contributions to this absolute work of art. But don't worry, as I have big plans for the future of this channel. Perhaps delving even deeper in Expedition 33, maybe a challenge run or two, or maybe even taking a look at other media I'm passionate about. But until then, have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.